The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets over my 12-year-old son's hospital bed. Rain hammered the window, each drop a fist against glass. The doctor had just left one experimental treatment. $1,200,000. 90 days or we lose him. I was 58, widowed, broke. So I did what any mother would. I called the people who swore on my wedding day. If anything ever happens to that boy, we'll move heaven and earth. My parents. They answered on the first ring. I heard laughter, clinking champagne, my sister's squeal in the background. Mom. Dad, please. It's life or death. Silence. Then my father's voice, cold as the IV bag dripping into my son's vein. We just closed on your sister's new house. $800,000. Marble counters. Pool. That's our legacy now. Your boy, not our problem. Click. The phone vibrated on the plastic chair. 110 missed calls. Texts. Video. Please. I locked the screen. Pulled my boy closer. Felt his fevered breath against my neck. They changed numbers. They blocked me. They partied while my child faded. But I kept every voicemail, every bank slip, every forged signature. And tonight in this storm, I made a promise louder than thunder. I will take back every cent they stole. I will turn their palace of lies into a sanctuary for the forgotten. And when the truth goes live on every screen in America, they will beg on their knees for the mercy they denied my son. Stay until the end. You'll see the house keys handed to strangers. The apology printed in tomorrow's paper, and the moment a dying boy teaches monsters what family really means. My name is Eleanor Marie Thompson, 58 years old, a retired elementary school librarian from Willow Creek, Ohio. I spent 35 years shelving picture books, wiping tears over scraped knees, and reading The Velveteen Rabbit until the spine cracked. After my husband Daniel died of a heart attack in the high school parking lot where he coached freshman football, I raised our only child, Grace, alone, and then helped her raise my grandson, Timothy. My Timmy, when she lost her own battle with breast cancer at 32. These days, my hands smell of antiseptic instead of construction paper glue, and the only stories I read are the ones printed on the back of prescription bottles. It was a Thursday in early March when the world tilted. Timmy had been listless for weeks, pale cheeks, bruises blooming like ink blots on his shins, but I chalked it up to growing pains. 12-year-olds sprout overnight, don't they? That afternoon, he collapsed in the driveway while shooting hoops with the neighbor boy. By the time the ambulance sirens faded, the emergency room doctor was using words no grandmother should ever hear. Autoimmune collapse, multi-organ involvement. Experimental protocol. The price tag came later, whispered in a fluorescent corridor, $1,200,000 payable within 90 days. Or the trial slot would close forever. I stood there in my sensible cardigan, clutching Timmy's stuffed giraffe, Mr. Spot's threadbare from a decade of bedtime adventures, and felt the floor drop away. I drove home on autopilot, the wipers slapping away sleet that refused to decide whether it wanted to be rain or snow. The house felt cavernous without Timmy's laughter echoing off the hardwood. I brewed a cup of chamomile that went cold, untouched, then opened the cedar chest in the spare room where I kept the relics of better days. Beneath Grace's wedding veil and Daniel's folded flag sat a yellowed envelope addressed in my mother's looping cursive, "For Timothy open only." If I had forgotten it existed. Inside was a single photograph from 1987, my parents, younger than I am now, cradling newborn Timmy on the front porch of the old farmhouse. On the back, my father had written in fountain pen ink that still smelled faintly of determination. "Anything happens to this boy, we move heaven and earth. Promise sealed, R&J Thompson." I traced the words with a fingertip that trembled more from memory than age. That promise had been spoken aloud the day Timmy was christened. My father, still robust in his flannel shirt and John Deere cap, had lifted a glass of sweet tea and declared to the entire congregation, "This child is our legacy. If ever he needs us, the bank can have the farm before he goes without." My mother, pearls gleaming against Sunday silk, had nodded so hard her hat feathers quivered. I had believed them the way children believe in fireflies, without question, with my whole heart. 36 years later, That heart was learning how brittle belief could be. I closed the cedar chest and walked to the kitchen window. Across the cul-de-sac, colored lights twinkled like cheap Christmas in March. My parents were throwing a housewarming for my younger sister Vanessa. 49, twice divorced, and perpetually the baby who could do no wrong. The new place sat on 5 acres of manicured lawn, a stone and timber monstrosity, with a 3-car garage and a kitchen island the size of my entire dining room. $800,000 the realtor had bragged on the community Facebook page, complete with heated floors and a wine cellar. I had scrolled past the photos with a polite smile until I recognized the chandelier, the same crystal fixture my mother had coveted in a catalog back when Timmy was learning to walk. She must have ordered it the moment escrow cleared. I pictured them now, my father in his new loafers, my mother swirling Chardonnay, Vanessa preening in front of the marble fireplace while neighbors oohed and awed. Meanwhile, Timmy lay tethered to monitors that beeped like accusatory metronomes. The contrast tasted metallic on my tongue, like blood from biting the inside of my cheek too hard. I glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. Visiting hours had ended, but the night nurse had slipped me a key card so I could sit with Timmy after rounds. I pulled on my coat, the one with the frayed cuff Daniel used to tease me about, and drove back through the storm. The hospital corridors were dim, the overhead speakers piping in soft classical music meant to soothe patients who weren't listening. Timmy's room smelled of iodine and warm cotton. He slept fitfully, one small hand curled around Mr. Spots' neck. I eased into the vinyl recliner, the kind that leaves permanent grid marks on your skin, and watched the numbers on the heart monitor climb and fall like a tide I could not control. At 12:03 a.m., the attending physician knocked softly. Dr. Patel's eyes were kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, but kindness couldn't soften the truth. Mrs. Thompson, the board approved Timothy for the protocol, but we need the deposit by Monday or the slot goes to the next family on the list. She hesitated, then added, the part that turned my stomach to water. Without it, palliative care is all we can offer. Palliative. A word that dressed death in softer syllables. I nodded, throat too tight for speech. She squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with the rain and the beeping and the weight of a promise broken before it was even tested. I fumbled for my phone, the screen lighting my face in ghostly blue. My parents' contact photo was still the one from Timmy's 5th birthday, my father hoisting him onto his shoulders, both of them grinning beneath paper party hats. I pressed call before doubt could stop me. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, laughter spilled through the speaker, bright and careless. My mother's voice tipsy with celebration. Ellie, honey, we're in the middle of Mom. My own voice cracked like thin ice. It's Timmy. He's dying. There's a treatment, 1 chance, but it costs. The line went muffled as if someone had cupped a hand over the receiver. Then my father, gruff and impatient, Eleanor, we talked about this. Vanessa's mortgage ate every dime of liquidity we had. The new house, the renovations. This isn't about marble counters. The words tore out of me raw and ragged. This is your grandson. A pause long enough for the heart monitor to beep 6 times. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by something brittle and unfamiliar. We gave at the office, so to speak. You'll figure it out. You always do. The call ended with a soft click, the way you close a book you no longer wish to read. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then darkened entirely. Outside, lightning stitched the sky, illuminating the parking lot in stark white flashes. In one of those flashes, I saw my reflection in the window, 58 years old, gray roots showing beneath drugstore auburn eyes ringed with exhaustion, and something fiercer. Resolve, maybe. Or the first ember of rage. I opened the voice memo app and pressed record, the red light steady as a heartbeat. March 15th. I whispered. They said no. I would keep every syllable, every silence, every lie. Because promises are only as strong as the paper they're written on, and I had just learned how easily paper burns. Back in the recliner, I rested my cheek against Timmy's hair, inhaling the scent of hospital shampoo and little boy sweetness. His fever had broken for the moment. His breathing evened out small puffs against my collarbone. I closed my eyes and saw the farmhouse porch again, saw my parents, young and certain, saw the fountain pen ink still wet with conviction. Heaven and earth, they had sworn. I wondered what they would move now, furniture perhaps, to make room for Vanessa's new sectional. The clock on the wall ticked past 1. Visiting hours were long over, but no one came to shoo me away. I stayed until the rain softened to a whisper, until the storm outside began to match the one building inside my chest. And somewhere in the hush between thunderclaps, a plan took shape, not fully formed, but sharp enough to cut. That night, the doctor said we had one last option. I dialed my father's number with shaking hands. The phone kept ringing in my hand, a mechanical heartbeat that refused to slow. My father's name pulsed on the screen like a warning light, but I couldn't bring myself to swipe. The line went to voicemail after the 7th ring, and the automated voice, cheerful, oblivious, invited me to leave a message. I pressed end instead, the click louder than the storm outside. Timmy stirred in his sleep, a small whimper escaping his cracked lips, and I slipped the phone into my coat pocket before the weight of it crushed me entirely. I had come back to the pediatric ICU with the naive hope that a second call spoken softer might pierce whatever armor my parents had donned at Vanessa's party. Instead, I stood frozen in the corridor, fluorescent tubes humming overhead like a swarm of judgmental insects while nurses in pastel scrubs glided past with practiced silence. Dr. Patel found me there 20 minutes later, her white coat flapping like a surrender flag. She carried a tablet instead of a clipboard, the modern equivalent of a death sentence. "Mrs. Thompson." She began, voice pitched low so the other families wouldn't hear. "We have the full panel." She guided me to a consultation room no bigger than a walk-in closet, its walls papered with faded posters about hand hygiene and childhood leukemia. A single box of tissues sat on the table like a dare. I took the chair farthest from it. I wasn't ready to cry again. She sat opposite tablet balanced on her knee and began to speak in the careful cadence doctors reserve for verdicts that cannot be softened. Timothy's condition had a name now: pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome, secondary to an ultra-rare autoimmune flare. The acronym PMIS-AF wasn't even in the standard textbooks yet. It had been identified in fewer than 60 children worldwide. His immune system had mistaken his own organs for enemy territory and was waging war with the efficiency of a seasoned general. Liver, kidneys, heart. Every major player was under siege. The bruises I dismissed as clumsiness were internal bleeding. The fever that broke and returned was his body cooking itself from the inside. Without intervention, she said his prognosis was measured in weeks, not months. But there was intervention. A Phase 1 trial at Boston Children's combining targeted immunotherapy with a gene-silencing cocktail, still under FDA compassionate use review. Success rate in the 12 documented cases: 62% full remission, 21% partial, 17%. Well, they didn't linger on the 17%. The catch, the one that turned my stomach to lead, was cost. The drug itself carried a 7-figure price tag before you added infusion suites, monitoring, travel lodging. Total estimate $1,200,000 non-negotiable, due within 90 days to secure Timmy's slot. Insurance would cover diagnostics and supportive care, but the trial fell into the abyss of investigational. Translation: cash on delivery or no delivery at all. I heard the numbers, but they floated past me like ticker tape at a parade I wasn't invited to. Dr. Patel slid a glossy folder across the table. Consent forms, payment schedules. A photograph of a little girl from Seattle who'd been the protocol's first graduate. The girl beamed, gap-toothed beside a Christmas tree alive. I traced the image with a fingertip that wouldn't stop trembling. 90 days. I repeated the words, tasting like rust. That's June 15th. Dr. Patel nodded. We'll hold the slot until then, but the deposit is firm. She hesitated, then added the part no one wants to say aloud. After that, we shift to comfort measures. Comfort measures. The phrase lodged in my throat like a fishbone. I thanked her because manners are the last thing to go and tucked the folder into my purse beside Mr. Spots's ear, which had begun to unravel. The corridor outside felt longer on the way back, each tile a mile marker on a road I didn't want to travel. Timmy's room was dim, the overhead lights dialed low to spare his eyes. The heart monitor painted green zigzags across the screen, steady for now. I eased into the recliner, its vinyl cracked from years of worried grandparents, and took his hand. His fingers were cool, the nails tinged faintly blue. I rubbed them between my palms the way I used to warm them after sledding back when the worst injury was a runny nose. I must have dozed because the next thing I knew, the wall clock read 2:17 a.m., and the storm had quieted to a drizzle that tapped the window like impatient fingers. My phone buzzed against my hip twice, then a flurry of vibrations that made the recliner vibrate with it. I fished it out, squinting at the screen. Unknown number, but the area code was local. I knew who it was before the voicemail notification popped up. My mother's voice thick with champagne and defensiveness. "Eleanor, call us back. We're worried you misunderstood." Misunderstood. As if I'd misheard the price of bread instead of the price of my child's life. I played the message on speaker volume low so it wouldn't wake Timmy. My father came on next, his tone the one he used when Vanessa dented the car in high school. Exasperated, but already calculating how to fix it without consequences. "Look, we're not made of money. That house for Vanessa, it's an investment in the family name. Property values in that neighborhood are through the roof. You want us to jeopardize everything we've worked for." A pause, the clink of ice in a glass. "Your sister's been through enough. 2 divorces, the fertility treatments cut her some slack." Cut her some slack. The phrase echoed in the sterile air, absurd and obscene. I ended the voicemail before my mother could chime in with her usual refrain about gratitude. The screen showed 14 missed calls, now 3 texts. "Call us. This is serious. Don't make a scene." I turned the phone face down on the blanket, but the glow seeped through the fabric like accusation. Timmy shifted, murmuring something about basketball practice. I smoothed the hair from his forehead, felt the fever creeping back, and realized I was crying without sound tears that slid sideways into my hairline, hot and useless. The ICU hallway outside was a tunnel of muted chaos, a janitor pushing a mop that smelled of pine sol and despair, a nurse whispering into a wall phone, the distant wail of an ambulance that might be bringing someone else's miracle, or someone else's ending. I stepped out just far enough to lean against the cool cinder block Timmy's tiny hands still clutched in mine through the open door. His fingers were so thin now. The knuckles protruded like knots in string. I pressed them to my lips, tasting salt and antiseptic, and felt the first fracture in the foundation of everything I'd believed about family. Not a dramatic split, but a hairline crack that widened with every heartbeat. Back in the room, I lowered the bed rail and crawled in beside him, careful not to jostle the IV. He weighed less than the boxes of books I used to haul for story hour. I curled around him the way I had when he was 4, and afraid of thunderstorms, my arm across his chest to feel the rise and fall. The monitor beeped its steady reassurance, but I knew better now. 90 days. $1,200,000. A house with marble counters, and a legacy that apparently didn't include the boy breathing shallowly against my ribs. My phone buzzed again, insistent as a mosquito. I didn't need to look to know whose name glowed on the screen. The vibration traveled through the mattress, through Timmy's spine, through my bones. I reached over and silenced it without lifting my head. The room fell back into its mechanical lullaby, beep, hiss, drip. I closed my eyes and listened to my grandson's heartbeat, counting each one like coins in a jar that was running dangerously low. As I sat beside my boy's bed, my father's name lit up my screen, and I let it ring. The phone finally stopped vibrating, leaving only the low electric hum of the monitors and the soft click of the ventilator cycling through its rhythm. Timmy's chest rose and fell in shallow increments, each breath a small victory I no longer trusted to last. I lay beside him until the sky outside the window shifted from ink to bruised violet, until the night nurse tiptoed in to change the IV bag and pretended not to notice the tear tracks drying on my cheeks. When she left, I eased my arm from beneath Timmy's shoulders, tucked Mr. Spots against his side, and pressed my lips to the warm crown of his head. His skin smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo the hospital used for pediatric patients, a cruel attempt at normalcy. "No more begging." I whispered the words, scraping my throat raw. "I swear it, sweetheart. From this moment on, we fight with facts, not tears." I slipped out of the bed, careful not to tangle the oxygen tubing, and stood in the half-light of dawn. My reflection in the darkened window looked like a stranger hair twisted into a knot that had given up, cardigan hanging loose on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. I straightened my spine anyway. Grief had been a heavy coat. Resolve felt lighter, sharper, like a blade I hadn't known I owned. I opened the voice memo app on my phone, the same one I'd used to record Timmy reading his first chapter book aloud, and pressed the red button. March 16th, 5:42 a.m. I said, keeping my voice level. "This is Eleanor Thompson, beginning a record of every communication regarding Timothy's care. No detail too small." I saved the file under the date and created a new folder labeled Evidence. My thumb hovered over the screen, then added a subfolder, Promises Broken. Back home, the house greeted me with the stale silence of a place that had forgotten how to hold joy. I brewed coffee I didn't taste, showered in water hot enough to scald away the hospital smell, and changed into the navy slacks and crisp white blouse I wore for parent-teacher conferences. Armor of a sort. The attic stairs creaked under my weight, the pull-down ladder groaning like it resented being disturbed. I hadn't climbed up here since packing away Grace's maternity clothes, but something tugged at me, an instinct sharper than memory. Dust motes danced in the single bulb's weak glow as I moved boxes labeled in my own handwriting. Christmas 2015. Timmy, age 3. Art Daniels Tools. At the back, beneath a stack of yellowed tax returns, sat a small cedar box I didn't recognize. The lid was carved with a simple lamb, the kind my father used to whittle during long winter evenings. A brass latch held it shut. The key was taped to the bottom with aging Scotch tape. Inside lay a single manila envelope, the paper brittle and tea-colored with age. Block letters marched across the front in my mother's unmistakable hand. Grandson's 60-year fund. Do not open until needed. My pulse stuttered. I had never heard of such a fund. I carried the envelope downstairs to the kitchen table, the one where Timmy used to color while I graded spelling tests, and laid it flat under the pendant light. The seal had never been broken. The wax stamp still bore the imprint of my father's college ring. I slid it open with a butter knife, hands steadier than they had any right to be. The top sheet was a letter dated September 12, 1987, 3 days after Timmy's baptism. My parents' signatures sat at the bottom like bookends. "We, Robert and Judith Thompson, do hereby establish a dedicated savings account for the sole benefit of our grandson, Timothy Daniel Harrison, to mature upon his 60th birthday, or earlier in the event of catastrophic need. Initial deposit, $50,000. Annual contributions, $10,000. Projected value at maturity, $800. $1,000 adjusted for inflation." The letter went on to name me as co-trustee, requiring dual signatures for any withdrawal over $5,000. I remembered none of this. My father had mentioned putting something aside once in the same breath as crop yields and interest rates, but I'd been 29, exhausted from night feedings, and the words had drifted past me like smoke. Beneath the letter lay a stack of bank statements, each one crisp despite the years. The most recent was dated March 12th, 3 days before Timmy's collapse in the driveway. Balance, $800, 1,000 exactly. A yellow post-it was stuck to the corner in my mother's handwriting. Transfer approved for V. Thompson closing costs, R&J. My breath caught. I flipped to the next page, a withdrawal slip initialed in my father's scrawl, the amount matching the realtor's brag about Vanessa's down payment. but my signature required by the trust terms was nowhere to be found. Someone had forged it a looping E that didn't quite match the one I'd practiced in cursive workbooks 50 years ago. I photographed every page the camera flashed stark against the worn wood of the table. Then I opened the voice memo app again. March 16th, 7:18 a.m. I said, angling the phone to capture the envelope and its contents. Discovered original trust document for Timothy's 60-year fund. Balance depleted without my consent or knowledge. Cross-referencing dates with Vanessa Thompson property closing. I paused the recording, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my fingertips. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome, counting down to something irreversible. I spent the rest of the morning building the diary. Every text from my mother. "We're praying call when you can" was screenshot and filed. Every voicemail from my father. "You're overreacting. Let's discuss this calmly" was transcribed and saved. I printed the trust letter, the bank statements, the withdrawal slip, and slid them into a fresh manila folder labeled Exhibit A. The weight of it in my hands felt like justice taking its first breath. I added the hospital's cost estimate, Dr. Patel's business card, the glossy brochure with the smiling Seattle girl. Each sheet was a brick in a wall I intended to build so high no one could climb over it. By noon, I was back at the hospital, the folder tucked into my tote beside a thermos of chicken soup Timmy wouldn't eat. The ICU smelled of bleach and cafeteria toast. I relieved the day nurse, settled into the recliner, and opened the folder on my lap. Timmy's eyes fluttered open long enough to register my presence, then closed again, trusting I would still be there when he surfaced. I took his hand, cool, fragile, perfect, and made the vow aloud this time, soft enough that only the monitors heard. "No more begging," I repeated. "We're done asking for what was already ours." The attic discovery burned behind my eyes like a pilot light. I opened the banking app on my phone, the one I hadn't touched since setting up Timmy's college fund, and stared at the trust account linked to my name. Balance $0. Pending transactions none. I screenshot the screen, added it to the folder, and labeled the file Forgery Confirmed. My parents had not simply refused to help. They had stolen from a dying child to buy marble counters for a woman who already had everything. The realization settled in my gut like cold iron, heavy but anchoring. I spent the afternoon alternating between Timmy's bedside and the family lounge, where the Wi-Fi was strong enough to upload backups to a cloud drive I password protected with Daniel's birthday. Every nurse who entered the room became a potential witness. I greeted them by name, asked about their children, slipped them my card with a quiet request to note anything unusual in the chart. The social worker assigned to Timmy's case stopped by with grant applications. I filled them out in triplicate, attaching copies of the trust betrayal as proof of financial sabotage. She read the withdrawal slip, eyebrows climbing toward her hairline, and promised to escalate to the hospital's legal team. Evening crept in the sky outside, turning the color of overripe peaches. Timmy slept through the shift change, his temperature steady for the first time in days. I kissed his forehead, whispered fresh promises into his hair, and gathered my coat. The folder was thicker now, edges crisp with purpose. I paused at the door, looked back at the small boy, swallowed by white sheets, and felt the shift complete. Grief had been a fog. Resolve was a map. I knew exactly where I was going. Inside was a bank statement showing $800,000 dated 3 days before my son collapsed. The hospital elevator doors slid open on the ground floor, and I stepped into the late afternoon light that poured through the lobby windows like warm honey. My tote bag weighed heavy against my hip, the folder inside swollen with photocopies and resolve. Timmy had managed a few spoonfuls of broth before drifting off again, and the nurse promised to call if his fever spiked. I needed air distance and a plan that didn't involve staring at the same 4 walls until the numbers on the monitor became my only reality. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, housewarming redo. "Tomorrow, missed you at the first one. Come see what Mom and Dad did for me." The exclamation point felt like a slap. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then typed back a single word. "Coming." I hit send before I could change my mind. The drive to the new subdivision took 20 minutes past the cornfields that used to border our family farm, and the strip mall where Timmy once begged for a Happy Meal toy. The houses grew larger with every turn, until the road widened into a cul-de-sac of stone facades and three-car garages. Vanessa's place sat at the apex like a crown, its limestone exterior glowing under landscape lighting that probably cost more than my annual pension. I parked behind a catering van and smoothed my blouse, the same one I'd worn to the hospital. No time to change. No desire to impress. I walked up the flagstone path past topiaries shaped like swans and rang the bell that played the first 4 notes of Beethoven's Fifth. Vanessa opened the door in a silk wrap dress the color of champagne, her hair swept into a chignon that screamed salon. "Ellie, you made it!" She air-kissed both cheeks, the scent of her perfume cloying. Come in, everyone's dying to see the kitchen." She linked her arm through mine as if we were girls again, and I let her lead me across the threshold into a foyer the size of my living room. A chandelier dripped crystals overhead, catching the light and scattering it like diamonds across marble floors veined in gold. Voices drifted from deeper inside laughter, clinking glasses, the low murmur of admiration. My parents stood near a grand staircase, my father in a blazer I didn't recognize, my mother clutching a flute of something bubbly. They spotted me at the same moment, and the smiles froze on their faces like frost on a window pane. Vanessa tugged me forward. "Tour time. You have to see the island, it's imported from Italy." She chattered as we moved through rooms that smelled of fresh paint and new money. A dining table that seated 14 A. Butler's pantry with a wine fridge the size of a compact car. A great room where a gas fireplace roared despite the mild spring evening. I nodded in all the right places, my eyes scanning for details I could weaponize later. The kitchen was the centerpiece, a cathedral of white cabinetry and quartz so polished I could see my distorted reflection in its surface. A platter of charcuterie sat untouched prosciutto, curled like rose petals around wedges of brie. 800,000, Vanessa said, spinning in a slow circle with her arms wide. "Can you believe it? Mom and Dad said it was time I had a forever home." My parents hovered at the edge of the island, my mother's fingers tightening around her glass. "Eleanor," she began, voice pitched high with forced cheer. "We were just talking about you. How is Timothy?" The question landed like a stone in still water. I met her gaze and saw the flicker of guilt she couldn't quite hide. "Stable," I said. "For now." Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. "Kids bounce back. Remember when I had mono in college? I was fine in a week." She laughed and the sound grated against my teeth. I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment to breathe. The space was wallpapered in gold foil, the sink a vessel of carved onyx. I splashed water on my wrists, counted to 10, then slipped back into the hallway. A gallery wall caught my eye. Family photos in matching silver frames, arranged like a shrine to Vanessa's triumphs. There was her college graduation, her first wedding, the sonogram of the baby she'd miscarried after the second divorce. And there, tucked between a beach vacation and a ribbon cutting for her boutique, was a framed document under glass. I stepped closer, heart thudding. The deed to the property, bold lettering across the top. Warranty deed Lot 7 Willow Ridge Estates. The buyers: Robert J. Thompson, Judith M. Thompson, and Vanessa L. Thompson. And there, in smaller type, beneath contingent co-owner for tax purposes, Timothy D. Harrison. My grandson's name printed clear as day, but a thick red line slashed through it, the ink still glossy as if applied that very morning. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo, the flash reflecting off the glass. Vanessa's voice echoed from the kitchen, calling guests to admire the backyard. I followed the sound, weaving through clusters of neighbors in designer denim, until I reached the French doors. The patio stretched wide, a pergola draped in wisteria, an outdoor kitchen with a pizza oven that probably cost more than my car. My father stood at the grill, flipping sliders with the same tongs he'd used at our old 4th of July barbecues. I waited until the crowd thinned, then approached. "Nice deed on the wall," I said quietly. He startled, nearly dropping a patty. "What deed?" I held up my phone, the image of the crossed-out name glowing on the screen. His face drained of color. That's just legal paperwork. Nothing to concern yourself with. I smiled, the expression tight. It concerns me when my grandson's name is on a property he'll never see. My mother appeared at his elbow, eyes darting to the phone. Eleanor. This isn't the time. I cut her off. The closing date on the deed is March 15th. The withdrawal from the 60-year fund is March 12th. Funny coincidence. My father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Vanessa breezed over, oblivious. Ellie, you have to try the truffle aioli. I ignored her, my gaze locked on my parents. Joint account rules require 2 signatures. Mine isn't on the withdrawal slip. Care to explain? The patio seemed to shrink, the chatter fading to a dull roar in my ears. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. There must be some mistake. We'll call the bank tomorrow. But her eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I knew the truth then, sharp as the red ink on the deed. They had forged my name, stolen Timmy's future to build Vanessa's dream. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the photo saved and backed up to the cloud. Enjoy the party, I said, turning on my heel. Vanessa called after me, confused, but I was already moving the folder in my tote, burning like a brand. I drove home with the windows down, the spring air cool against my flushed cheeks. The deed photo sat open on my passenger seat, the red slash a wound I intended to widen. I thought of Timmy's small hand in mine, of the trust document gathering dust, while marble counters gleamed under recessed lighting. The betrayal was no longer a crack. It was a chasm. And I was done falling into it. Under property conditions, my son's name was crossed out in fresh red ink. The porch light of Vanessa's mansion was still blazing when I pulled away, its glow shrinking in my rearview mirror until it looked like a single smug star. I drove home with the radio off, the silence thick enough to chew. My phone stayed dark on the passenger seat, the red slash deed photo now joined by a new folder labeled Emotional Evidence. I had promised myself facts, not feelings, but some wounds demand both. The weeks that followed blurred into a calendar of absences. Empty chairs at chemo, unopened birthday cards, and a social media feed that mocked me with turquoise water and infinity pools. Timmy's first outpatient infusion fell on a Tuesday in late April. The oncology day unit smelled of bleach and burnt coffee, its recliners filled with children whose heads were wrapped in bright bandanas. I wheeled Timmy in at 8 sharp, his IV pole rattling like a shopping cart. The nurse hung the bag of immunotherapy, golden fluid dripping slow as honey, and I settled beside him with a stack of comic books. I had texted my parents the night before, chemo starts tomorrow 8 a.m. if you want to hold his hand. No reply. At 8:47, the door stayed shut. At 9:12, I took a photo of the empty vinyl chair opposite us and saved it to the folder. By noon, the session ended. Timmy slept against my shoulder while I stared at the door that never opened. The second infusion was a Thursday. Same text, same silence. This time I recorded a 15-second video, the clock on the wall reading 8:03. The nurse adjusting the drip. My own voice soft in the background. Still waiting. I uploaded it to the private cloud drive I had password protected with Daniel's old football jersey number. The third infusion brought rain. Water streaked the windows while Timmy colored a superhero mask the child life specialist had given him. I snapped another photo, his small fingers clutching crayons, the chair beside us still vacant. My parents were, according to Vanessa's Instagram story, touring a vineyard in Napa, toasting with glasses that caught the California sun. Vanessa herself posted daily. A sunrise yoga session on a paddleboard. A close-up of lobster rolls captioned, "Living my best life." Hashtags, #blessed, /sister weekend, /no filter. Each image landed in my notifications like a pebble against glass. I screenshot every one, timestamped and filed. The contrast was surgical, my grandson bald from pre-treatment steroids, her skin bronzed and flawless. I did not comment, did not like, did not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, I printed the photos on plain paper, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges, and slid them into a manila envelope marked Visual Proof of Prioritization. Timmy noticed the absences first. He had always been observant, the kind of child who remembered the name of the janitor and the color of the librarian's earrings. One evening in early May, after a steroid crash left him weepy and wired, he looked up from the puzzle we were failing to complete and asked, "Why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore?" His voice was small, the question hanging in the air like a soap bubble I was terrified to pop. I set down the puzzle piece, half a yellow sun, and pulled out my phone. "Let's record your questions, sweetheart. For memory." I pressed the red button. He repeated it, chin trembling. "They used to bring me books. Now they don't come. Did I do something wrong?" The recording lasted 9 seconds. I saved it under his name and date, then played it back so he could hear his own bravery. He fell asleep, clutching the phone like a teddy bear. The birthdays were the cruelest milestones. Timmy turned 12 on May 23rd. I baked a lopsided chocolate cake in the hospital kitchenette, the nurses singing off-key while he blew out a single candle stuck in a cupcake. I had mailed invitations to my parents 3 weeks earlier. Construction paper cards he decorated with stickers of astronauts. No RSVP. On the morning of the party, I checked the mailbox junk flyers, a bill from the electric company. Nothing else. I photographed the empty slot, then the cake with its single candle already relit for the photo. Pew. That night I added 3 new entries to the log. Birthday 10, no show. Birthday 11, no show. Birthday 12, no show. The pattern was undeniable. The texts piled up like unread homework. 47 in total, each one a paper cut. "Can you stop by after dialysis? Radio silence. Timmy drew a picture for Grandpa. Can you pick it up?" "Nothing. Need help with medical forms? Any chance you're free?" Crickets. I copied every thread into a single document. The blue bubbles on the left, the gray void on the right. The voicemails were worse, 23 messages ranging from pleading to polite to panicked. I transcribed them word for word, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. "It's Mom, call when you get this. Dad here, just checking in. Eleanor, we're worried you're not managing." I saved the audio files separately labeled by date and emotion. By mid-June, the isolation had calcified into something I could almost touch. Neighbors still waved from their driveways, but their smiles carried the pity of people who had heard rumors and chosen sides without asking questions. The church ladies brought casseroles that went cold on the porch. I thanked them through the screen door and added their names to a list of potential character witnesses. Timmy's questions grew quieter, asked only when the pain meds made him loopy. I recorded each one, the phone hidden in my palm like a talisman. The night of the 110 missed calls began ordinarily enough. Timmy had spiked a fever after his latest infusion. We were back in the pediatric ward, the room smaller than the last, the window facing a brick wall. I sat in the rocking chair, his hand in mine, counting the drip of the IV. My phone was on silent, but the screen lit up like a disco. 7:12 p.m. Mom, 7:13. Mom, 7:14. Mom. The calls came in waves, sometimes seconds apart, sometimes minutes, as if she were redialing the moment the voicemail picked up. I let them roll to the recording, each one a pebble added to the avalanche I was building. At 9:47, the screen showed 110 missed calls, all from the same number. I finally swiped to listen to the most recent. "Eleanor!" My mother's voice cracked. Champagne bravado gone. "Pick up. We need to talk about the house." The message cut off at 30 seconds. I saved it, labeled it urgent, and stared at the ceiling tiles until they blurred. Timmy stirred, mumbling about spaceships. I kissed his forehead, tasted salt and fear, and added the call log to the folder. The evidence was no longer a pile, it was a fortress. Then came the night of the 110 missed calls from my mother. The call counter froze at 110, and the screen finally dimmed, but the silence that followed was louder than any ring. I stared at the black glass until Timmy's breathing evened out again, then slipped the phone into my cardigan pocket and eased the rocking chair into motion with my heel. The motion soothed him the way it had when he was an infant. The motion steadied me now. 110 calls in under 3 hours meant something had cracked in my mother's carefully lacquered composure, and I intended to pry that crack wide open. I needed allies, people who understood betrayal the way a sailor understands storms. I knew exactly where to find them. The next morning, I left Timmy with the child life specialist and drove to the church fellowship hall, the one with the avocado green carpet and the coffee pot that never quite emptied. The Wednesday Widows group met at 9 sharp, a dozen silver-haired women in cardigans and sensible shoes, who had buried husbands, raised grandchildren, and outlived every promise ever made to them. I had taught Sunday school with most of them for 20 years. They knew my face, my voice, and the way grief sat on my shoulders like an unwelcome guest. I carried a box of lemon bars from the bakery on Maple Street, grease-stained proof that I came in peace, and set it on the table beside the styrofoam cups. Marjorie Klein, 81 and sharp as winter air, poured me coffee without asking. "Sit, Eleanor. You look like you've been dragged through a knothole." The others murmured agreement, their eyes kind but unflinching. I took the chair at the head of the table, the one usually reserved for the pastor, and laid my folder on the formica like a deck of cards. "I need witnesses," I said. "Not pity. Witnesses." I opened the folder and fanned the contents, the trust letter, the forged withdrawal slip, the deed with Timmy's name slashed in red, the birthday photos with empty chairs. I played the 9-second recording of Timmy asking why his grandparents no longer visited. The room went still enough to hear the coffee percolate. Ruth Ann Miller spoke first. She had lost her family farm to a brother who claimed their father was confused in his final days. "My girl," she said, voice trembling with old fury. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you might be the one who finally makes them pay." One by one, the stories spilled out: a sister who sold the lake cottage out from under a niece with cancer, a brother who drained their mother's annuity for a condo in Florida, a cousin who rewrote the will while the ink was still wet on the hospice papers. Hands reached across the table, gnarled fingers closing over mine in a pact older than any courtroom. By the time the lemon bars were gone, I had 12 sworn depositions in my pocket and a war room in the basement of Willow Creek Presbyterian. The paralegal arrived 2 days later. Harriet O'Donnell, 73, retired after 40 years at the county courthouse, wheeled her oxygen tank into the hospital corridor like a trusty sidekick. She had read my email attachment on her tablet during dialysis and showed up unannounced, sensible loafers squeaking on linoleum. "Show me the chart," she said without preamble. I led her to the nurse's station, signed the release forms, and watched her flip through Timmy's admission papers with the efficiency of a card shark. She stopped on a page I had skimmed past, a durable power of attorney form, dated the day Timmy collapsed, granting my parents medical decision-making authority in the event Eleanor Thompson is unavailable. My signature sat at the bottom, neat and looping. I had never seen the document before. Harriet's eyes narrowed behind bifocals. "This is a hospital template, but the notary stamp is from a title company in the next county. And look," she tapped the date. "Filed electronically at 3:17 p.m. You were in the ER waiting room at 3:17 p.m. Weren't you?" I nodded, throat dry. She pulled a magnifying glass from her purse. Actual glass, the kind detectives use in old movies, and studied the ink. Signature's a lift and paste job. "See the pixel halo. Someone scanned your driver's license and overlaid it. Felony forgery minimum." She snapped a photo with her phone, emailed it to herself, and handed me a business card for a pro bono attorney who owed her a favor from a wrongful death suit in 2009. "Call Margaret Liu. Tell her Harriet sent you. She eats liars for breakfast." Margaret met me in the hospital cafeteria the next afternoon, a petite woman in a charcoal suit who looked more like a college professor than a litigator. She spread the documents across the table like a poker hand and listened without interruption while I recounted the timeline. When I finished, she tapped the power of attorney. "We start with the forgery. That voids every decision they claim to have made on Timmy's behalf. Then we trace the trust money through the title company public records, easy enough. The house closing is the smoking gun." She leaned forward, voice low. But we need a stage. Somewhere public, somewhere they can't walk away. Suggestions. I thought of Vanessa's endless stream of party invitations, the marble palace that mocked me every time I drove past. A family reunion, I said. At the house. Invite the whole neighborhood, the church, the local news blogger who loves a scandal. We'll call it a celebration of Timmy's progress. Margaret's smile was small and lethal. Perfect. They won't dare refuse without looking guilty. We'll salt the guest list with our widows and a court reporter. You bring the evidence. I'll bring the subpoenas. We shook hands over lukewarm coffee and the plan took shape like a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon. I spent the following week crafting invitations on heavy cream stock. Timmy's smiling face from last Halloween. The words, "Please join us to celebrate hope" in elegant script. I mailed them to my parents, to Vanessa, to every neighbor within a 5-mile radius. I included the church widows, the hospital social worker, and the reporter from the Willow Creek Gazette who had covered the school levy. Harriet printed enlarged copies of the forged documents on glossy poster board. Ruth Ann baked 7-layer bars laced with enough sugar to keep tongues loose. Margaret secured a court order to preserve all bank records related to the trust served via certified mail the day before the party. The trap was set. The morning of the reunion dawned clear and warm, the kind of June day that makes Ohio forget winter exists. I dressed Timmy in his favorite NASA t-shirt, the one with the tiny rocket ship, and wheeled him out to the car with Mr. Spots tucked under his arm. He was pale but alert, the latest round of treatment buying us borrowed time. "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. I smoothed his hair. "Everyone's coming, sweetheart. And today the truth gets its turn to speak." We arrived at Vanessa's cul-de-sac just after noon, the driveway already filling with cars. Neighbors milled on the lawn, red Solo cups in hand, admiring the koi pond Vanessa had installed since my last visit. My parents stood near the front door, faces tight with forced smiles. I parked at the curb, helped Timmy into the wheelchair the hospital had loaned us, and rolled him up the flagstone path. The widows were already inside, stationed like sentries near the charcuterie. Harriet waved from the kitchen island oxygen tank discreetly hidden behind a potted ficus. Margaret stood by the fireplace, tablet in hand, chatting with the Gazette reporter as if they were old friends. I maneuvered Timmy to the center of the great room, the same spot where Vanessa had spun in her silk dress weeks earlier. A portable projector sat on the coffee table, wired to my laptop. The screensaver cycled through photos of Timmy: first steps, first bike, first lost tooth. Guests gathered, curious, sensing the shift in the air. Vanessa fluttered over in a sundress the color of orange sherbet. "Ellie, you made it. Let me get Timmy some lemonade." I raised a hand. "In a minute. First a presentation." I nodded to Margaret, who dimmed the lights with the wall switch. The room hushed. I opened the laptop, fingers steady, and clicked the file I had labeled for this exact moment. As the guests arrived, I pressed play on the hidden file labeled Smith Family Trust. The first frame of the hidden file bloomed across the 85-inch television like a wound opening in slow motion. The Smith Family Trust logo, crisp and official, filled the screen, followed by the original 1987 letter in my parents' handwriting. Gasps rippled through the great room as the camera panned across the document, zooming in on the line that read, "Annual contributions, $10,000 until maturity." The widows stood sentinel along the back wall, their faces carved from granite. Vanessa's lemonade glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble citrus pulp, spreading like blood. I let the silence stretch until it snapped, then clicked to the next slide. The March 12th withdrawal slip, $800,000. My forged signature glowing under the projector's harsh light. Dessert had been served minutes earlier. Individual chocolate lava cakes arranged on gold-rimmed plates by a caterer who now hovered frozen near the kitchen pass-through. The sweet scent of molten ganache hung in the air, cloying and obscene. I advanced the presentation with a remote I had palmed all afternoon. Bank transfer records appeared, arrows tracing the money from the trust account to the title company escrow, then to Vanessa's closing statement. The final frame froze on the deed, Timmy's name slashed in red, the ink so fresh it caught the light like wet paint. My father's face drained to the color of printer paper. My mother's pearls clicked together as her jaw worked soundlessly. I turned to the room, 60 pairs of eyes reflecting the screen's blue glow. For those just joining us, I said, voice steady as the foundation of the house we stood in. This is what $800,000 looks like when it's stolen from a dying child to buy quartz countertops. A murmur rose, phones lifting like periscopes. I had anticipated the cameras. Margaret had coached me to speak slowly to let every word land. I clicked again. The voicemail icon pulsed. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, tinny through the television speakers, yet unmistakable. We gave the house to keep the family name strong. Your boy's situation is regrettable, but Vanessa's the future now. The recording cut off with the beep of a disconnected call. Vanessa lunged forward, silk sundress fluttering. "That's taken out of context," she shrieked, but Ruth Ann stepped between us, oxygen tank hissing like a referee's whistle. "Sit down, child," the old woman said. "The adults are talking." Vanessa's knees buckled. She sank onto the ottoman as if someone had cut her strings. I faced the crowd again. This isn't just a family matter anymore. It's live. I lifted my phone, the screen already open, to the Willow Creek Moms Facebook group, 8,000 members strong, the same women who organized meal trains and GoFundMes for strangers. The live stream counter ticked upward, 127 viewers. 312. 800. Comments scrolled in a blur. What is happening? Is that the new house on Ridgeview? Someone call the police. I angled the camera toward the television, then toward my parents' ashen faces. For anyone wondering why Timothy Harrison hasn't had a single visitor from his grandparents during 12 weeks of treatment, here's your answer. My mother found her voice at last shrill and splintering. Turn that off. This is private. I smiled, the expression foreign on my lips. Private, you used a public title company, a public bank, and a public notary. Nothing private about fraud. Margaret stepped forward, tablet in hand. Under Ohio Revised Code 2913.31, forgery of a financial instrument is a fifth-degree felony. The statute of limitations is 6 years. Clock's ticking. She nodded to the Gazette reporter who was already typing furiously into her phone. Vanessa tried again, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. "Mom. Dad, tell them it's a misunderstanding." My father opened his mouth, closed, it opened it again. No sound emerged. The room had become a courtroom, the leather sectional, the jury box. I advanced to the final slide, a split screen of Timmy's hospital bed and the kitchen island where we stood. The contrast was surgical. I let it linger, then closed the laptop. The television went black, reflecting 60 stunned faces. I walked to the center of the room, Timmy's wheelchair beside me. He looked small against the vaulted ceiling, but his eyes were bright. My grandson asked me why his grandparents stopped visiting. I said, I didn't have an answer then. I do now. I pulled the printed deed from my folder, the red slash vivid under the recessed lights, and held it up. This is why. A collective inhale sucked the oxygen from the space. Someone in the back began to clap, slow and deliberate. Marjorie joined, then Harriet, then the entire row of widows. The sound built until it rattled the crystal chandelier. My mother took a step forward, hands outstretched. "Eleanor, please," I raised my phone higher, the live stream counter now at 4200. "Smile for the internet, Mom. You're trending." Vanessa sobbed into a napkin, the orange sherbet dress pooling around her like melted ice cream. My father stared at the floor, shoulders folded inward as if the weight of 60 years had finally settled on them. Margaret leaned close, voice low. "Channel 4 wants the footage. They're prepping a live hit at 6. I nodded, fingers already navigating to the secure upload link she had preset. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Phones passed hand to hand, the story metastasizing in real time. I looked at Timmy. He gave me a thumbs up, the gesture so ordinary it nearly broke me. I knelt beside his chair, kissed the top of his head, and stood again. I hit send. The screen flashed, uploading to Channel 4 News Live in 60 seconds. The upload bar hit 100% and the screen flashed green. Then the Channel 4 logo replaced my phone's reflection. A push alert pinged across Willow Creek. Breaking: local family accused of stealing sick child's trust fund live. At 6. I lowered the phone and looked around Vanessa's great room. The reunion had dissolved into stunned clusters. Neighbors clutched each other's arms, mouths open, eyes wide. Timmy's wheelchair sat like a throne in the center, and he gave me the smallest nod, the kind that said he understood more than any 12-year-old should. I wheeled him toward the door, past my parents' frozen silhouettes, past Vanessa's crumpled form on the ottoman. No one tried to stop us. The front door closed behind us with the soft finality of a coffin lid. By 7 the next morning, I was back in the hospital recliner. Timmy still asleep when the television above his bed flickered to life with the Channel 4 sunrise anchor. Good morning, Willow Creek. Our top story: a grandmother's fight for justice after her own parents allegedly diverted $800,000 meant for her grandson's cancer treatment. The clip rolled my presentation slides, the voicemail, the red-slashed deed narrated by a reporter who looked barely older than Grace had been. They cut to a live shot of the grocery store on Main Street, where owner Frank DeMarco was taping a handwritten sign to the glass: "We do not serve those who betray blood." The camera zoomed in on the bold Sharpie letters, then panned to a line of customers nodding approval. My phone buzzed non-stop screenshots, memes, the hashtag #grandma's promise, climbing local trends like ivy on brick. I muted the television and opened the Willow Creek Moms group on my tablet. The live stream from the reunion had been downloaded 400 times overnight. Comments poured in at a rate I couldn't read fast enough. Someone had overlaid the deed photo with the grocery sign. Another had stitched Timmy's hospital portrait beside the marble kitchen island. By 8 o'clock, the hashtag was the top trending topic in a 50-mile radius, and the national desk at Channel 4 had picked it up for the noon feed. I forwarded every post to Margaret with a single instruction: archive everything. The grocery store sign was only the beginning. By noon, the hardware store on Elm had taped a similar notice to its door. The coffee shop where Vanessa once held court for brunch refused her loyalty card with a polite, "Policy change, ma'am." The Presbyterian Church Bulletin included a prayer request for a family divided by greed, seeking reconciliation and restitution. I printed each instance, added them to the growing binder, and labeled the tab "Community Response." The outrage was organic, unstoppable, the way a spark becomes a wildfire when the wind is right. Vanessa tried to fight back on the evening news. She sat on the same ottoman where she had collapsed, mascara freshly applied, voice trembling with rehearsed fragility. "This is a private family matter blown out of proportion," she told the camera, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "My parents were helping me start over after 2 painful divorces. My nephew is getting the best care. My sister is just angry we couldn't do more." The anchor cut to a split-screen Vanessa's tearful face beside the grocery store sign, then the deed with Timmy's name slashed out. The reporter's voiceover was calm. "Surgical court documents filed this morning allege forgery and fraud. The family has declined further comment." The segment ended with a GoFundMe link for Timmy's treatment, already at $43,000. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Vanessa's boutique lost half its followers in an hour. The other half flooded the reviews with 1-star ratings and screenshots of the news clip. Someone posted a photo of her car parked outside the nail salon with the caption, "Getting a Manny," while her nephew fights for his life. The comment section erupted. By 9 that night, #grandma's promise was trending statewide, and the national morning shows were calling Margaret for exclusives. I declined all interviews. The evidence spoke louder than my voice ever could. Margaret met me in the hospital cafeteria at 10, sliding into the booth with a manila envelope thick enough to serve as a doorstop. The room smelled of overcooked lasagna and industrial cleaner, but the fluorescent lights felt warmer than they had in weeks. She ordered decaf and waited until the server walked away before speaking. The title company rolled over, she said, tapping the envelope. They produced the original closing file under subpoena. There's a memo from your father to the escrow agent dated the day Timmy collapsed requesting the forged power of attorney be attached for expedited processing. She paused, letting the weight settle. It's admissible, and it's not the only surprise. I took a sip of tea that had gone cold. The cafeteria television was muted, but the crawl read Willow Creek Scandal Family Trust. Fraud allegations. A photo of the grocery store sign flashed, then Vanessa leaving the news station, head ducked against a barrage of camera flashes. I felt no triumph, only the steady drum of purpose. What else, I asked. Margaret's smile was thin and sharp. The bank flagged a second withdrawal attempt yesterday, another $200,000, same account, same forged signature. They froze it before it cleared. Your parents are lawyered up, but the prosecutor's office is circling. She pushed the envelope across the table. The paper was soft with age, the corners curled. This came by courier from an anonymous source. Return address is a P.O. box in Dayton. I turned it over. The seal was intact, the handwriting unfamiliar. My name was written in careful block letters. I slid it open with a plastic knife, revealing a single cassette tape and a folded note. Play this. You'll want to hear it before the grand jury. No signature. That's when the lawyer slid a yellowed envelope across the table. There's one more thing. I stared at the envelope Margaret had slid across the cafeteria table, the yellowed paper soft as old skin. My fingers trembled only slightly as I unfolded the note again. Play this. You'll want to hear it before the grand jury. The cassette tape inside was a relic, its plastic shell cracked along one edge, the label faded to illegibility. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the weight of secrets recorded before Timmy could even walk. Margaret signaled the server for a to-go cup, her eyes never leaving my face. Hospital AV department has a player in the basement, she said. I already cleared it with security. I nodded, tucked the tape into my purse beside the binder that had grown thick as a phone book, and followed her through the maze of corridors that smelled of floor wax and canned green beans. The audiovisual room was a windowless box lined with dusty VHS tapes and outdated projectors. A tech in a polo shirt emblazoned with the hospital logo hooked the cassette into a battered deck that looked older than Timmy. The reels spun with a mechanical whir. Then a voice crackled through the tiny speaker my father's younger recorded in the days when his baritone still carried authority without apology. This is Robert Thompson supplementing the Smith Family Trust, recorded September 15, 1998, for clarity of intent. A pause, the rustle of paper. In the event Vanessa Lynn Thompson bears no living children by her 40th birthday, the remainder of the trust corpus, currently valued at $412,000, passes in toto to Timothy Daniel Harrison, son of Eleanor Marie Thompson, to be held in guardianship until his 25th birthday. My mother's voice chimed in softer but firm. We want the family line secure. Vanessa's our hope for grandchildren, but if that blessing doesn't come, Timmy is next in blood. The tape hissed, then clicked off. I rewound it, played it again, the words searing themselves into memory. Margaret produced a legal pad and transcribed every syllable while the tech transferred the audio to a digital file. This predates the 60-year fund by a decade, she said, tapping the pad. It's a separate instrument, irrevocable without both settlers' consent. Your parents a notice to the contingent beneficiary, meaning you, as Timmy's guardian. She pulled a photocopy from her briefcase, the 1998 trust document itself, its pages crisp despite the years. The language was dense legalese, but the intent was crystal. Vanessa childless at 40. Timmy inherits everything. Vanessa had turned 40 the previous October, 6 months before Timmy's collapse. The math was merciless. I drove home in a daze, the cassette riding shotgun like a sleeping passenger. The binder went with me everywhere now. I added the 1998 transcript under a new tab labeled Contingent Heir. That night, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the same table where Timmy used to build Lego spaceships. I aligned the original trust beside the amendment Margaret had subpoenaed from the bank. The amendment was dated March 16th, the day after Timmy flatlined in the ambulance, the day I had signed nothing but consent forms for emergency intubation. The new beneficiary, Vanessa Lynn Thompson, sole and absolute. My parents' signatures sat at the bottom, witnessed by a notary whose embossed seal I recognized instantly, the same circular stamp that had validated Vanessa's real estate closing, the same looping initials of the agent who had bragged about the heated floors. I photographed every page under the pendant light, the flash harsh against the legalese. The notary's license number was printed beneath the seal. A quick search on my tablet confirmed she worked exclusively for the title company that handled Vanessa's purchase. Conflict of interest, Margaret had called it enough to invalidate the amendment on its face. I printed the notary's public profile, highlighted the overlap, and slid it into the binder. The pattern was no longer coincidence. It was choreography. The next morning, I met Margaret at the county courthouse, the cassette and documents sealed in an evidence bag. We filed a motion to invalidate the amendment, attaching the 1998 audio, the forged power of attorney, and an affidavit from the hospital social worker, confirming my presence in the ICU at the exact time the amendment was supposedly executed. The clerk stamped the papers with a thud that echoed through the marble hallway. "Emergency hearing scheduled for Monday," she said. "Judge Harlan doesn't like fraud." Margaret's smile was wolfish. "Neither do we." I spent the weekend cross-referencing dates. Vanessa's 40th birthday fell on October 12th. The amendment was signed 5 months later, 3 days after Timmy's heart stopped for 47 seconds. I pulled the ambulance report, the defibrillator log, the nurse's notes that read Code Blue, return of spontaneous circulation. I lined them up beside the amendment, the notary stamp glaring like a brand. The timing wasn't opportunistic. It was predatory. They had waited until Timmy was legally dead, however briefly, to rewrite his future. Monday's hearing was held in a courtroom that smelled of lemon polish and old fear. My parents sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a lawyer whose suit cost more than my car. Vanessa was absent, citing emotional distress. Judge Harlan, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like gravel, listened to the cassette without expression. When the amendment was projected onto the screen, she leaned forward, peering over her glasses at the notary seal. "Counsel," she said to my parents' attorney, "explain to me how a document executed while the minor was in cardiac arrest complies with the original trust's notice requirements." The lawyer stammered. My father stared at his shoes. Margaret rested her case in under 10 minutes. The judge's gavel fell like a guillotine amendment, voided original 1998 terms, reinstated emergency freeze on all related accounts. I left the courthouse with the certified order in my hand, the paper still warm from the clerk's stamp. Timmy was waiting in the hospital playroom building, a block tower with the child life specialist. I knelt beside him, showed him the judge's signature. "This means the money they took might come back," I said. He nodded solemnly, then added a red block to the top. "For my spaceship fund," he asked. I laughed, the sound foreign but welcome. Exactly. That night, I added this court order to the binder, the pages now thick enough to prop open a door. I stared at the amendment one last time, the date stamped in black ink like a gravestone. The change of beneficiary form was dated 3 days after my son flatlined. The court order restoring the 1998 trust felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was rusted shut. I folded the document into the binder with the same reverence I once reserved for Timmy's first-grade report card, then drove back to the hospital under a sky the color of dishwater. The playroom blocks had been replaced by a puzzle of the solar system. Timmy was fitting Saturn's rings into place with the concentration of a watchmaker. I kissed the top of his head, inhaled the clean scent of pediatric shampoo, and promised myself the next fight would be the last one he'd have to endure from a bedside. Margaret texted while I was wheeling him to physical therapy. "Meet me at the office, new package from the insurer." The word package sat in my stomach like a stone. Margaret's firm occupied the second floor of a brick building that had once been the town pharmacy. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and printer toner. She had spread a new set of documents across the table like a deck of cards she was eager to play. Blue Cross caught wind of the court ruling, she said, sliding a thick envelope toward me. They launched an internal audit on every claim tied to Timmy's diagnosis. Guess whose name popped up as the policyholder on a chronic care rider? I opened the envelope. The top sheet was a claims summary: Vanessa L. Thompson claimant. Timothy D. Harrison covered dependent. Benefit type experimental chronic care supplement. Amount requested $800,000. My pulse thudded in my ears. I flipped to the application. Vanessa had submitted it 4 days after Timmy's collapse, using the hospital's initial prognosis of likely lifelong dependency to qualify for a rider designed for children with irreversible conditions. The form listed her address as the Marble Palace, her relationship to the patient as aunt and legal guardian by power of attorney. The forged POA was attached the same pixelated signature Harriet had flagged weeks earlier. The medical narrative was a masterpiece of half-truths, projected lifetime costs, in-home nursing, adaptive equipment, all inflated to justify the maximum payout. The insurer had approved it pending quarterly updates. Vanessa had failed to provide once Timmy began responding to treatment. Margaret tapped a highlighted line. The payout was wired to an escrow account the same day as the house closing. Same routing number, same title company, same notary stamp. They didn't even bother to disguise it. She laid out the bank statements side by side, the insurance disbursement on March 20th, the down payment transfer on March 21st. $800,000 exact to the penny. I traced the numbers with a fingertip that refused to steady. The money meant to fund Timmy's recovery had instead funded heated towel racks and a sub-zero refrigerator. I leaned back in the chair, the vinyl creaking under my weight. Felony? I asked. Margaret nodded. Ohio Revised Code 22913.47. Insurance fraud over $500,000 is a second-degree felony. Statute of limitations is 6 years from the date of the last false statement. Vanessa filed an update in April claiming Timmy was bedridden and ventilator dependent. That was lie number 2. Clock's still running. She produced a flash drive. Full claims file redacted for privacy. The insurer wants to avoid publicity. They'll cooperate if we keep their name off the indictment. I spent the afternoon in the hospital resource room, a converted storage closet with a flickering fluorescent bulb and a computer older than Timmy. I printed every page: the application, the medical attachments, the payout confirmation, the escrow ledger. I highlighted the lies in yellow, the money trail in pink. The binder now required a second volume. I added a new tab labeled Insurance Fraud and slid the flash drive into a plastic sleeve. The paper trail was so clean it gleamed: every transfer, every approval, every forged signature linked like pearls on a string. That evening, I met with the prosecutor assigned to the case, a young woman named Carla Ruiz, who had grown up 2 streets over from our old farmhouse. She listened without interruption while I walked her through the documents, the timeline, the overlapping notary. When I finished, she closed the folder and looked me in the eye. We'll take the forgery and the trust theft to the grand jury next week. The insurance angle is the hammer. If Vanessa thought public shaming was bad, wait until she's explaining to a judge why she profited from her nephew's near death. She paused, then added softly, I'm sorry this happened to your family. I thanked her, the words tasting of iron. Back in Timmy's room, the night nurse was adjusting his IV. He was asleep, one hand curled around Mr. Spot's, the giraffe's ear, now completely detached. I sat beside him and opened the binder to the insurance summary. The payout clause was buried in fine print: full amount, disbursed upon confirmation of permanent disability or continued treatment beyond 12 months. Timmy's latest scans showed tumor shrinkage. His prognosis had shifted from months to years. The money had been approved on the assumption he would never leave the hospital. I closed the binder, the snap of the rings loud in the quiet. Margaret called at dawn. The insurer wants a settlement meeting. They'll claw back the $800,000 plus penalties if Vanessa signs a confession of fraud. Otherwise, we go public with the claims file. I watched the sun rise over the parking lot, painting the sky the color of Vanessa's sundress the day of the reunion. No settlement, I said. Let the grand jury decide. Margaret's laugh was short and sharp. Thought you'd say that. I added the prosecutor's business card to the binder, then the insurer's demand letter. The paper trail was no longer a path. It was a highway, and Vanessa was driving straight into oncoming traffic. I looked at Timmy at the steady rise and fall of his chest and felt the last piece click into place. The payout would have been exactly $800,000 if the boy had stayed sick. The hospital corridor outside Timmy's room was quiet at 11:30, the night shift moving on hushed souls. I sat in the vinyl recliner with my laptop balanced on my knees, the screen's glow the only light besides the green heartbeat on the monitor. The insurance fraud file was closed, the prosecutor's card tucked into the binder, but sleep felt like a country I no longer had a visa for. I opened a new tab, typed GoFundMe into the search bar, and stared at the blank campaign page. Title, goal, story. My fingers hovered. Then I typed the only words that mattered. Grandma's promise help. Timmy beat the odds, his family bet against. I uploaded a photo from Better Days Timmy at 8, gap-toothed and sunburned, holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. I wrote the truth in plain sentences, the trust, the forgery, the house built on a sick child's future. I set the goal at $1,200,000, the exact cost of the protocol, and hit publish at 11:59 p.m. By midnight, the page was live. I refreshed once, twice, then set the laptop on the rolling tray and closed my eyes for what I thought would be a minute. The next thing I knew, the monitor read 4:17 a.m., and my phone was vibrating itself off the blanket. Notifications stacked like bricks, $25 from Marjorie Klein. God bless you both. $100 from Ruth Ann Miller for the Spaceship Fund. $500 from an anonymous donor. Keep fighting, Grandma. The total sat at $50,000 and climbing each ping a small firework in the dark. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was dreaming, but the numbers kept rising. Someone had shared the link to the Willow Creek Moms group. Someone else had posted it on the local news Facebook page. By dawn, the campaign had cleared 62,000, and the Channel 4 morning anchor was reading the story live. I wheeled Timmy to the playroom at 8 so the child life specialist could distract him with finger paints while I watched the segment on the cafeteria television. The anchor, a woman with a kind voice and perfect highlights, held up a printout of the GoFundMe page. Willow Creek. You've done it again, she said. In just 8 hours, Grandma's promise has raised over $75,000 for 12-year-old Timothy Harrison, whose own grandparents allegedly diverted his medical trust to buy a luxury home. She clicked a button on her phone, the camera zooming in on the screen. I'm adding 200 from the morning team. Let's get this boy to Boston. The co-anchor followed with another 200. The ticker at the bottom updated in real time: $78, $400, $79, $100, $80, $1,000. Back in the room, the church ladies arrived in a flurry of cardigans and Tupperware. Marjorie carried a quilt stitched from Timmy's old t-shirts. Ruth Ann presented a basket of prayer shawls in every shade of blue. One for every chemo day, she said, draping the softest over Timmy's shoulders. He fingered the yarn eyes wide. They smell like cookies, he whispered. The ladies laughed, the sound bright as bells. Harriet rolled in with her oxygen tank and a laptop showing me the campaign analytics shares in the thousands donations from as far as Oregon. You've gone viral, Eleanor, she said. National outlets are calling. I shook my head. Let the money speak. Timmy needs quiet, not cameras. The total hit 100,000 by noon, then 200 by supper. Strangers left messages I read aloud to Timmy while he ate vanilla pudding. You are stronger than they ever were. Your grandma is a warrior. We believe in miracles. Each note was a brick in a new foundation, one built on kindness instead of betrayal. I printed the donor map pins dotting every state and taped it to the wall above his bed. Look, I told him. The world showed up. He traced Ohio with a sticky finger, then added a star where Boston would be. The anonymous envelope arrived at 3 in the afternoon, delivered by a courier who refused to give his name. It was plain Manila, my name typed in block letters, no return address. I signed for it in the lobby, the wait light, but ominous. Back in the room, I slid it open with a plastic knife from the cafeteria tray. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. I worked for your parents 40 years. They let me go the day Timmy collapsed. I kept something they'll regret. Play this in private. No signature, just a faint scent of lavender water. Beneath the note lay a micro SD card in a tiny plastic case, its label written in the same trembling hand, the real family meeting. I stared at the card, the hospital noises fading to a dull roar. Timmy was napping the prayer shawl tucked under his chin like a blanket of clouds. I slipped the card into my phone with an adapter the tech department had loaned me weeks earlier. The file directory showed a single video time-stamped 2 years before Timmy's diagnosis. My thumb hovered over play, then pulled back. Whatever was on this card had waited in silence for 24 months. It could wait until I was steady. I ejected the card, sealed it in a fresh evidence bag, and texted Margaret new delivery. Meet me at the house tonight. Whatever truth this held, it would not be opened beside a child's hospital bed. The GoFundMe crossed 300,000 by nightfall, the donor wall a tapestry of hope. I refreshed the page one last time before lights out, watching the numbers climb like a ladder to the stars. Timmy stirred, murmuring about spaceships. I kissed his forehead, whispered thanks to every stranger who had clicked donate, and tucked the evidence bag into the binder's front pocket. The platform I had built from pain was now a bridge, and thousands were crossing it to reach us. Inside was a micro SD card labeled, "The Real Family Meeting." The micro SD card lay in the evidence bag like a sleeping scorpion, its plastic case catching the dim glow of the hospital nightlight. I slipped it into my purse beside the binder and wheeled Timmy's empty breakfast tray into the corridor, the wheels squeaking a nervous rhythm. Margaret had replied to my text with a single thumbs-up emoji, her version of urgency, and promised to meet me at the house by 7. I kissed Timmy goodbye, told the nurse I'd be back before noon rounds, and drove home through streets still wet from an early summer shower. The old farmhouse looked smaller than I remembered, its white siding peeling like sunburned skin. But the kitchen table was steady, and that was enough. Margaret arrived with a laptop and a portable projector she borrowed from her firm's AV closet. We set up in the dining room, the same room where my parents had once hosted Thanksgiving for 20. I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead while she inserted the card into an adapter. The screen flickered, then stabilized on a grainy color feed, the farmhouse living room 2 years earlier, the angle high and wide classic nanny cam placement in the built-in bookshelf. The timestamp read, March 10th, 10:47 p.m. My parents sat on the floral sofa that had belonged to my grandmother, a bottle of bourbon open between them. My father's voice came first, slurred but deliberate. "We've got to be smart about this," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "Vanessa's closing on the Ridgeview lot in April. 800,000 down, non-refundable if we back out." My mother leaned forward, pearls glinting in the lamplight. "The boy's trust matures in 48 years. That's a long time to tie up liquidity." The camera caught every nuance, the way my father's knuckles whitened around the glass, the way my mother's lips thinned into a line I had seen only when Vanessa wrecked the car in high school. "If Timmy's condition worsens," she continued, voice dropping to a whisper that still carried the money stays with us, "let the boy fade, and it's Vanessa's legacy." I paused the video, my hand clamped over my mouth. Margaret's face was stone. "Keep going," she said. I pressed play. My father nodded slow and heavy. "No heroic measures. We tell Eleanor the doctors did all they could." The timestamp rolled forward, 10:52 p.m. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp as a judge's gavel. The feed cut to black at 11:03. The motion sensor triggered off. Margaret ejected the card, labeled it Exhibit 5, and slid it into a fresh evidence sleeve. "This predates the collapse by 3 days," she said. "It's premeditation." And the first missed hospital visit was March 13th, the day Timmy was admitted with pneumonia. They never showed. I stared at the frozen frame on the laptop, my parents' faces distorted by the low resolution, but unmistakable. The bourbon bottle was the same one my father had cracked open for Grace's college graduation. I remembered the pneumonia admission vividly, Timmy feverish and coughing me texting my parents from the ER waiting room. Their reply, a single thumbs-up emoji. I had taken it as busy. Now I saw it as dismissal. I opened the binder to the hospital log, flipped to March 13th, and underlined the entry in red, "No family visitors." The video timestamp aligned like a key in a lock. Margaret packed the projector while I brewed a second pot of coffee, the bitterness matching the taste in my mouth. "We'll authenticate the file through the camera's metadata," she said. The housekeeper must have pulled the card before they wiped the system. I nodded, then remembered the note. I fetched the lavender-scented paper from the envelope and read it aloud. Margaret's eyes narrowed. 40 years. That's Mrs. Delgado Lords. She cleaned for your parents from the time you were in diapers until the day Timmy collapsed. I heard she was let go without notice. I closed my eyes, picturing the small woman with the gentle hands who had braided my hair for picture day, who had taught Timmy his first Spanish words. She had vanished from our lives as suddenly as the money had. I texted the church ladies group chat. "Anyone have Lords Delgado's contact?" Within minutes, Ruth Ann replied with a phone number and an address in the next town over. I called immediately. The voice that answered was soft, accented, unchanged by time. "Mrs. Eleanor." I prayed you would reach out. I explained the video, the hearing the need for her testimony. Silence stretched, then a sigh. "I kept the copy in case God asked for justice," she said. "I will come tomorrow. Bring the card. I still have the original camera manual." She hung up before I could thank her. Lords arrived the next morning in a faded blue coat, her gray hair pulled into the same neat bun I remembered from childhood. She carried a manila folder thick with pay stubs, Christmas cards, and a photocopy of her termination letter dated the day Timmy collapsed, citing restructuring. She laid the nanny cam manual on the table, its pages yellowed but intact. "Motion activated," she explained. "I installed it myself when Timmy started walking your parents worried about falls. They forgot it was there." She inserted the original SD card into Margaret's reader. The file played identical to the copy metadata intact. Lords pointed to the timestamp. That night, I was in the kitchen, heard raised voices check the feed from my phone. I saved it to my cloud before they fired me. Margaret transcribed Lords' statement on the spot, every detail notarized by a mobile service she had on speed dial. The video became the centerpiece of a new motion intent to defraud via premeditated neglect. We filed it with the prosecutor that afternoon, Lords' signature steady beside mine. Carla Ruiz called within the hour. "This changes the charge sheet," she said. "Conspiracy to commit fraud. Possible endangerment. Grand jury's Monday." I hung up, looked at Lords across the kitchen table and saw tears in her eyes. "I love that boy," she whispered. "I love him still." I drove her home through fields of corn just beginning to tassel the sky wide and forgiving. She clutched the folder like a hymnal. At her doorstep, she pressed a small wooden cross into my palm. "For strength," she said. I closed my fingers around it, the grain warm from her hand. Back at the hospital, Timmy was awake, coloring a rocket ship in shades of prayer shawl blue. I showed him the cross. He tucked it under his pillow. The binder now held the video, the manual Lords' statement justice in triplicate. That night, I played the file one last time on my laptop, headphones on, so Timmy wouldn't hear. The final frame froze on my mother's face as she said, "Dead grandkids don't sue." The frozen frame of my mother's face lingered on the laptop screen like a bad photograph I couldn't delete. I closed the lid with a soft click, the sound swallowed by the hospital's mechanical lullaby. Timmy slept beside me, the wooden cross from Lords tucked beneath his cheek, his breathing steady for the first time in weeks. I slipped the laptop into the tote bag, the binder now so thick it strained the zipper, and stared out the window at the parking lot lights flickering through summer haze. The video had been delivered to the prosecutor. The grand jury was set for Monday. I thought the worst was behind us, that the truth had done its work. I was wrong. The community had only begun to speak. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day that packs pews with sundresses and seersucker. I tuned the hospital television to the church's live stream out of habit, expecting the familiar drone of the opening hymn. Instead, the camera panned to the front doors of Willow Creek Presbyterian, where two deacons in navy blazers stood like sentries. My parents approached in their Sunday best, my father's tie too tight, my mother clutching her leather Bible. The head deacon, Mr. Hargrove, raised a hand. "Robert Judith, the session has voted to suspend your membership pending resolution of the allegations against you. You are not welcome in worship today." My father's mouth opened-closed. My mother's face crumpled. The camera caught every second the feed chat exploding with heart emojis and prayer hands. The deacons escorted them back to the parking lot, the doors closing with solemn finality. The sermon that followed was on the prodigal son. The irony was not lost on the thousands watching online. By noon, the news had spread faster than gossip at a beauty salon. Vanessa's realtor called to cancel the open house scheduled for that afternoon, citing unforeseen circumstances. I learned later from Ruth Ann that a caravan of minivans had arrived at the Ridgeview cul-de-sac windows, down teenagers in the back seats armed with cartons of eggs purchased from the very grocery that had banned my family. The marble facade took the brunt yoke, sliding down the limestone like yellow tear shells crunching under tires as the cars circled and departed. Someone posted a video set to upbeat pop music. It racked up 10,000 views before Vanessa's lawyer demanded it be taken down. The damage was done. The house that had been photographed for a lifestyle blog now looked like abstract art gone wrong. Monday's newspaper carried my mother's apology on the front page above the fold. The letter was printed in full, her looping cursive reduced to 12-point font. To the Willow Creek community, I offer my deepest remorse for the pain my actions have caused my daughter, Eleanor, and my grandson, Timothy. I pray for forgiveness and healing. Judith M. Thompson. The same letter ran Tuesday, then Wednesday, each day with a fresh headline. Day 2. Grandmother's plea. Day 3. Family fracture deepens. I clipped each one, added them to the binder under a new tab labeled Public Reckoning. The church livestream clip joined them, time-stamped and annotated. The punishment was swift, public, and entirely out of my hands. Vanessa tried to salvage her reputation with a tearful Instagram post from the boutique surrounded by racks of sundresses no one was buying. "I'm a victim of circumstance," she wrote. "Please respect my privacy." The comments were brutal. Circumstance doesn't forge signatures. Privacy for the house built on a child's pain. The boutique's Google rating plummeted to 1 star. The physical door stayed locked, a handwritten sign reading "closed" until further notice taped crookedly to the glass. Neighbors who had once fought for invitations to her parties now crossed the street when they saw her car. The open house cancellation became permanent. The listing agent removed the property from the MLS, citing seller request. My parents' downfall was quieter, but no less devastating. Their country club membership was revoked by email, the board citing conduct unbecoming. The garden club removed my mother's name from the perennial bed she had funded for 20 years. The hardware store where my father had bought nails for every home project posted a subtle sign, "Cash only for certain accounts." I saw none of this firsthand. The church ladies delivered the updates with casseroles and prayer shawls, their eyes bright with the satisfaction of justice served cold. I accepted the food, thanked them, and added every detail to the binder. The community had become the jury, and the verdict was unanimous. Tuesday afternoon. I sat with Timmy in the hospital garden, a small courtyard with a fountain that gurgled like a cheerful lyre. He was stronger now, the latest scan showing shrinkage that made Dr. Patel smile for the first time in months. He pushed his IV pole along the brick path, counting the koi in the pond. "Grandma," he said, using the name he had only recently adopted, "when I get better, can we have a party?" Not like Aunt Vanessa's. A real one. I knelt to his level, smoothed the hair that was beginning to grow back in soft curls. The best party I promised, with cake and balloons and everyone who showed up for us. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to the fish. That night, the prosecutor called. Grand jury returned indictments, she said. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Arraignment. Thursday. I thanked her, hung up, and opened the binder to add the news. The pages were nearly full, the story complete. I closed the ring, set it on the rolling tray, and crawled into bed beside Timmy. He smelled of hospital soap and hope. I thought the storm had passed, that the fallout had settled into dust. But just when I thought it was over, my son tugged my sleeve. Mom, I have an idea. Timmy's small fingers tugged the sleeve of my cardigan with the same insistence he once used to beg for one more chapter at bedtime. I turned from the window where the hospital courtyard lights flickered through the dusk, expecting a request for pudding or a new coloring book. Instead, he held a sheet of hospital stationery, the kind with the faint blue grid meant for nurses' notes covered in his careful block printing. His eyes, still ringed with the faint bruises of treatment, shone with something fiercer than fatigue. "Read it," he whispered. I took the paper, the ink still wet in places, and read aloud so the words could settle between us like stones in a pond. Dear Hospital Board, my name is Timothy Daniel Harrison. I am 12 years old, and I have been your patient for 91 days. My grandparents and my aunt took $800,000 that was supposed to help me get better, and used it to buy a big house with a pool. The judge says the house is mine now because of the trust. I do not want a house. I want other kids to have beds when they are scared, and moms who do not have to sleep in chairs. Please take the house and make it a place where families can stay for free when their children are sick. I will sign whatever you need. Thank you, Timothy D. Harrison. I read it twice, the second time silently, my throat closing around the simplicity of his generosity. He had written it during quiet time, the child life specialist later told me, using the stubby pencil he kept tucked behind his ear like a magician. I folded the letter along its careful creases and pressed it to my chest. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" I asked. He nodded, the motion decisive. "It's what superheroes do," he said. "They give the treasure back to the people who need it." I kissed the top of his head, tasting salt and determination, and called Margaret from the hallway phone. She arrived within this hour, legal pad in hand, eyes bright behind her glasses. We sat at the rolling tray that served as Timmy's desk, the letters centered between us like a treaty. Margaret explained the mechanics in the calm voice she reserved for frightened clients. The court had already restored the 1998 trust, naming Timmy sole beneficiary. As his legal guardian, I could facilitate the transfer with judicial approval. The hospital foundation had a non-profit arm designed exactly for such gifts. She drafted the petition on the spot, citing precedent from a similar case in Cincinnati, where a minor donated inherited property to a children's ward. Timmy listened, chin propped on his fists, asking only whether the new families would get to pick their own paint colors. Margaret promised to include the clause. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning in the same courtroom where the amendment had been voided. Judge Harlan greeted us with the same steel-gray gaze, but her mouth softened when Timmy rolled in wearing his NASA t-shirt and a tie I had knotted crookedly. He carried the letter in a plastic sleeve, the grid lines now protected like stained glass. Margaret presented the petition, the trust documents, the hospital's acceptance letter, already signed by the foundation director. Vanessa's attorney tried to object, claiming undue influence, but the judge silenced him with a look. "The child wrote the letter in his own hand," she said. "I've seen the medical records. He's competent." Timmy raised his hand like he was in school. "May I speak?" The judge nodded, leaning forward. He read the letter aloud, his voice cracking only on the word scared. When he finished, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the air conditioning hum. Judge Harlan dabbed her eyes with a tissue she produced from her robe. "Motion granted," she said. "Guardianship transfer approved. Title to be conveyed to Willow Creek Children's Hospital Foundation within 30 days. The gavel fell like a starting pistol. We celebrated with ice cream in the hospital cafeteria, Timmy choosing chocolate despite the risk to his port. Margaret handled the paperwork whirlwind quitclaim deed, guardianship addendum, tax exemptions. I co-signed every line, my signature steady beside Timmy's wobbly but proud scrawl. The hospital public relations team scheduled a press conference for the following Tuesday on the front steps of the Marble Palace, timing it with the title transfer. They invited local news, the Gazette, and a crew from the Cleveland affiliate that had covered the indictments. I tried to prepare Timmy for the cameras, but he only asked if he could wear his cape, the one the child life specialist had sewn from a red pillowcase. Tuesday dawned humid and bright. We arrived at the Ridgeview cul-de-sac in a hospital van. Timmy's wheelchair decorated with balloons the nurses had tied on at dawn. News vans lined the curb, satellite dishes unfolding like metal flowers. Neighbors clustered behind police tape, some holding signs that read, "Thank you, Timmy," in glitter glue. Vanessa stood in the driveway, arms crossed over a linen blouse, her face pale beneath oversized sunglasses. My parents were absent, their attorney citing health concerns. The hospital foundation director, a kind-faced man named Dr. Kessler, set up a podium on the front walk, the deed packet thick in his hand. Reporters shouted questions as we approached, but Timmy waved them off with the imperious gesture of a boy who had faced worse than microphones. Dr. Kessler spoke first, thanking the community, outlining the plan the house would become Grandma's Promise Lodge, a free residence for families of pediatric patients, fully furnished utilities paid by the foundation. He introduced Timmy as the donor. The crowd hushed. I wheeled him to the podium, adjusted the microphone to his height, and stepped back. Timmy unfolded his letter, the same one now laminated for posterity, and began to read. His voice carried clear across the lawn, amplified by the news trucks. He stumbled only once on the word legacy, but recovered with a grin that showed the gap where his front tooth had been. Cameras clicked like hail on a tin roof. Vanessa swayed, then sank to her knees on the warm asphalt, sunglasses slipping to reveal eyes red from crying or rage. A reporter knelt beside her, microphone extended, but she buried her face in her hands. The moment was captured from every angle, destined for the evening news. Timmy finished the letter and looked up, the cape fluttering in the breeze. He had rehearsed this part with me in the hospital garden, practicing until the words felt like his own. The crowd waited, breath held. Then my son stepped to the podium and said, "This house belongs to kids who still have a chance." The applause that followed Timmy's words rose like a wave, crashing over the manicured lawn and sweeping the reporters into a frenzy of shouted questions. I stood behind his wheelchair, one hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor of excitement that ran through his thin frame. Dr. Kessler lifted the oversized scissors from a velvet cushion. The red ribbon stretched taut across the double front doors. Timmy reached for the handles, his small hands overlapping the doctor's, and together they snipped. The ribbon fluttered to the flagstones in two perfect halves, and the camera zoomed in as the doors swung open to reveal the transformed interior. What had been Vanessa's Marble Palace was now Grandma's Promise Lodge, every surface softened by donated quilts and fresh paint in shades of sunrise. The hospital foundation had worked miracles in 30 days. The wine cellar became a playroom stocked with toys still in their boxes. The home theater was repurposed as a quiet room with recliners and noise-canceling headphones. The 6 bedrooms were fitted with hospital-grade beds and privacy curtains in patterns chosen by pediatric patients during art therapy. The kitchen island, once a monument to excess, now held slow cookers filled with chili for the first residents. 30 mothers stood in the foyer, each clutching a duffel bag and a child's hand, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had been selected from the waiting list, families who had slept in hospital chairs or driven hours daily because motels were unaffordable. A social worker handed out key cards explaining the rules: no cost, no time limit, just healing. We moved inside for the live broadcast. Channel 4 had set up in the great room the 85-inch television, now displaying a slideshow of before and after photos. Timmy rolled to the center, the cape still tied around his neck, and the anchor knelt to his level. "Timothy, what does it feel like to give away a mansion?" she asked. He considered the question with the gravity of a philosopher. "It feels like trading a dragon's hoard for 100 nights of good sleep," he said. The anchor laughed, tears in her eyes, and the feed cut to the mothers exploring their rooms. One woman opened a dresser to find pajamas in her daughter's size. Another discovered a basket of toiletries with a note that read, "Welcome home." The weeping started softly, then built until the microphones caught every sob. I guided Timmy to the fireplace where a brass plaque waited on a velvet stand. The engraving had been his idea, dictated to the foundation's artist during a video call from his hospital bed. He lifted it with both hands, the metal cool against his palms, and pressed it into the wet cement the mason had prepared. Built on a lie. Rebuilt on love. The words gleamed as the cement set the cameras circling like birds. Dr. Kessler announced the lodge's dedication, his voice breaking when he thanked Timmy by name. The 30 mothers gathered behind us, their children peeking from behind legs, some bald, some bandaged, all wide-eyed. A little girl with a port scar visible beneath her sundress tugged Timmy's cape. "Is this heaven?" she whispered. He shook his head. "It's better. It's a promise." Outside, Vanessa watched from the sidewalk, barred by the security the hospital had hired after the egging incident. She stood alone, the linen blouse now wrinkled, her sunglasses pushed into her hair. The news crews had moved on to the plaque, but one cameraman lingered, capturing her solitude against the backdrop of the lodge's new sign. She lifted a hand as if to wave, then let it fall. A neighbor walked past with a stroller, deliberately crossing the street. Vanessa's shoulders folded inward, and she turned away, the click of her heels on the pavement the only sound. The ribbon cutting segued into a tour. Timmy led the way, narrating like a pint-sized docent. This was the wine room. Now it's for Legos. The pool is heated for kids who can't swim in cold water. The mothers followed, touching the quilts, opening drawers, discovering pantries stocked with snacks their children could actually eat. One woman found a rocking chair in her assigned room and sank into it, rocking her sleeping son while tears slid down her cheeks. The anchor narrated softly the live feed, now national. The ticker at the bottom reading, "Grandma's Promise Lodge opens gift from 12-year-old cancer survivor." Donations to the foundation poured in through a QR code flashing on screen. We ended in the backyard where the foundation had installed a swing set and a garden plot for families to plant flowers. Timmy cut a second ribbon, this one tied around a sapling maple, and the cameras pulled back for a wide shot of the lodge in full sunlight. The 30 mothers stood on the patio, their children clustered around Timmy like ducklings. He raised his hand in a solemn wave, the cape catching the breeze. The anchor signed off with a promise to follow the lodge's first year, then the feed cut to commercial. I was helping Timmy back to the van when the social worker approached with a clipboard. "We're full," she said, voice trembling with wonder. Every bed, every crib. And the waiting list just tripled. I looked at the lodge, its windows glowing with lamplight, and felt the weight of what we had built. The marble was still there, but it no longer mocked. It sheltered. The heated floors warmed feet that had walked miles of hospital corridors. The kitchen island fed bellies that had known only vending machine dinners. As cameras rolled, my phone buzzed. Account frozen fraud. Investigation opened. The marble palace that once mocked my grandson's pain now shelters 30 mothers who no longer have to choose between gas money and a hot meal. On the day we cut the ribbon, Timmy stood at the podium in his red cape and declared the house belonged to kids who still had a chance. The cameras caught every tear as those mothers walked into rooms with real beds, real closets, real hope. Vanessa watched from the sidewalk alone while the world watched her fall. And just when we thought the story had found its ending, my phone buzzed with a message that proved the fight wasn't over. Account frozen, fraud investigation opened. If this journey from betrayal to grace moved, you hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss what happens next. Drop a comment below. Would you have donated the house or kept it for revenge? Your stories fuel this channel, and every like, every share keeps Grandma's Promise alive for the next family walking through hospital doors with nothing but fear. Let's keep the conversation going because some promises are worth fighting for.